Friends, boom bada boom, the walls were shaking for Russians. More than 200 drones attacked Russia in Engels. A military airfield was attacked. Strategic bombers that attacked Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FAB's cabs and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that KH-555 and KH-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 were damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days now after a drone attack. The GUR successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea, hitting air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter. 13 Russian radar stations were hit. And in Russia, they claimed that the Ukrainian armed forces attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information, as I understand it, there were several bombers there and one ill, which delivered the missiles. Here it says that in the morning, an IL-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of KH-101 missiles. And at Engels, there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160S. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is, to what extent? Why? Because it was a large-scale attack, both with drones and most likely with a missile. That explosion, since it was an explosion. Then the fifth element that broke through the roof, if anyone remembers that movie, was most likely one of our missiles, not ruling out even the possibility of a long-range Neptune being used in that direction, and naturally, the detonation that followed the strike. And the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, small arms ammunition, which is also loaded onto the plane, and naturally the planes standing nearby were damaged. They couldn't have avoided being damaged. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think in the next few days, our intelligence, our general staff will confirm this after gathering information from satellites and images, decoding them, in other words, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll be able to celebrate once again. Maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm this with certainty.
Roman Igorovich, what could have been hit? The bombers themselves, the storage facility with cruise missiles, and the aviation fuel depot. These elements were the targets of Ukraine's armed forces, our missiles, and our drones.
Any strategic bomber base is, just to give you an idea, quite like a large city, where in addition to the airfield itself, a truly huge number of different facilities are involved to support it. A large number of important infrastructure objects and facilities of various types, ranging from extensive and complex underground fuel storage tanks, which are capable of holding and storing tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, to a variety of different warehouses and storage buildings are present in the area. And SIS, which is especially important, is the Special Engineering Service for Missile Preparation, and of course the storage of aviation bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, they are still far away and not many people talk about this. But south of Engels, several dozen kilometers along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility, the so-called Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage facility. More precisely, it is a storage facility for nuclear warheads for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, it houses significant stockpiles of the 12th GUMO, the 12th main directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, specifically for tactical nuclear weapons. Just a few dozen kilometers, and the mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engels. It would be a real massive one all the way to Kazakhstan. Kazakhs, you saw it yourselves. It's just a shame, truly unfortunate. I have too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I hate to disappoint them, but still, this is a very serious, highly secure facility, and to take it out, not just with missiles or drones to level it completely, you'd need several squadrons of bombers for carpet bombing. But if you were to detonate this underground, the consequences could be catastrophic. In the fuel storage facility, let me repeat, there are tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, which is used by strategic bombers. A single bomber like the Tu-160 takes on 3 railway tank cars of this kerosene. That's over 150 tons of aviation kerosene being filled up. And for the Tu-95, it's 1 railway tank car, which is still quite a lot. And there is a reason to strike there. And regarding the damage that could be inflicted on all of these facilities, it could be catastrophic for the Russians. By the way, it was to Engels that we once handed over our planes. The Tu-160, Tu-95, Tu-22, our Kh-55s, hundreds of missiles were handed over by Kuchma back then. Kuchma was the one handling this at least. And now basically what we are going to do is try to destroy the very same strategic bombers that we once in the past handed over to the Russians. As for what exactly was hit in this particular incident, that will become clear and evident within a few days once the satellite images are carefully decoded and thoroughly analyzed by experts.
Roman Yegorovich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases, military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks and the area involved varies. But at a minimum, there should definitely be a regiment there. About 1,500 Russian troops should be involved in this process. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have eliminated enemy personnel with these strikes, Roman Igorovich?
Absolutely, 100%. The thing is, even SIS, the Engineering and Technical Service, the Special Engineering Service, is involved. Naturally, there's also the security and defense of the facility itself and the storage of the missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches after all. There are even certain climate control mechanisms in place, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen were definitely taken out there, and the remaining hundreds were certainly emptied out by that strike. Believe me, the shockwave was felt all the way in Syria.
Roman Igorovich, right now the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a whole day after the drone attack. And everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, the modified missile. Let's discuss this missile as well as the strikes on oil refineries, bases, and on Kavkazskaya, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
Maliuk and Budanov's sanctions have now become the sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Why? Because in such strikes like the one on Engels, the Security Service of Ukraine and Special Operations Forces were, of course, involved. That is at the very least. And probably also the Navy, if it was a Neptune missile, because a coastal missile system, at least the launch platform, is used. But I think it will become clear within a day. Long, Neptune long is the same story. That is, it is launched from a coastal missile system. Naturally, Mishpap is involved in this. The main targets for this kind of cruise missile are targets that need to be penetrated. For example, after all, a 150-kilogram warhead is not the same as a drone's 20 kilograms or 50, or however much they carry. A 150-kilogram warhead can reach its target and detonate, just as we are seeing now. Presumably, let's put it that way for now. Presumably, a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs was blown up in Engels. Naturally, the same kind of warhead can be used elsewhere, on TUAPs, or to breach their detonation systems, or at the pumping stations. This is one of our main tasks right now. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these representatives who are not from our government are running around. They're running around with the idea of how to secure the Russian hydrocarbon sector. So God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If last year in May, Maliuk and Budanov sanctions hadn't been stopped, there wouldn't be any this year because there would be nothing left to destroy. We would have just burned everything down over the past year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes. The missile is very good. It's our basic missile, Neptune and Mylong, or Neptune. It's basically the X-35 missile. At one time, it was also produced at our facility with our engines for this missile, turbofan engines, dual circuit missiles. It was an air-to-ship missile. That's its main purpose, meaning it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded to be able to strike ground targets, and with a good engine and additional fuel tanks, it can now cover more than 500 kilometers, at least up to the fuel tank limit. It reached up to that many kilometers. I think it could have also hit Engels because they managed to breach a warehouse that was practically sealed. These missiles are not just lying around outside. So it's sealed, and since it was breached, it most likely means a missile got in. But there is no confirmation yet, so we won't confirm it either for now. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Igorovich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new possibilities does this open up for us? Let's make sure we record this now.
Well, the range of the missile, at least the confirmed one, it's definitely 500 to 600 kilometers. We've seen this with TUAPs and maybe now with Engels. Engels is a little over 600 kilometers away. That's the actual stated range. So what does 500 to 600 kilometers mean? Well, it's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to TUAPs. Just draw that circle. That's everything we can reliably hit with this missile. And the stated range, 1,000 kilometers, you can set the compass to St. Petersburg, for example, and draw a semicircle almost reaching the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would reach beyond the Volga, at least past Engels, past Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, this missile would reach the North Caucasus if the stated range matches the actual flight range. Technically, this is possible. The engine is very good. Our engine, which we produce, will definitely run for 1 hour, and the missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour. So running for 1 hour or 1 hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. That is, however many extra buckets you fill into the missile, that's how far it will go in terms of range.
That means military and infrastructure targets in Moscow and St. Petersburg could be attacked.
Well, obviously, they're already under serious targeting, and in order for us to fully carry out our tasks of securing our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to be able to reach as far as the Urals. It's 2,000 kilometers to the Urals. But as for cruise missiles, it's hardly worth it, for example, to make cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, they're a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. For this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, that is ballistic missiles. I think if we don't solve this issue this year, we'll do it next year.
Another piece of good news is that the main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in occupied Crimea. Air defense systems were hit, as well as naval vessels and a helicopter. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including the 1 L-125, NIO-BSV, NIO-BSV, and NIO-BSV, Brelsmais. How do you assess the work of the main intelligence directorate? As I understand it, all this was done over a certain period of time, and it has now been documented.
Well, this definitely took several months. This is the work of GUR's Beks and Magur. The main intelligence directorate and the security service, their own Beks, practically from unmanned boats, they turned them into aircraft carriers. Both of them did it. Both Magur from GUR and Sibebi from the SPU. These vessels can now operate almost like an aircraft carrier, carrying unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and they are also capable of carrying unmanned surface and underwater vehicles. This means they can function as a kind of mothership and also act as a relay station at the same time, providing support and coordination. Here's a boat that's several meters long, a certain width, and it can take unmanned aerial vehicles on board, for example, and approach the coast of Crimea or somewhere on Russian territory closer to Novorossiysk. And from several kilometers off the coast, it can launch drones under direct control using exactly the boat as a relay station. The guys can carry out a combat mission just like they do directly with, say, those same FPV drones. So a certain type of drone, a UAV, takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system, an anti-aircraft missile system, or some other military target, depending on its capabilities. Plus, especially the GUR's Magura drones can also carry missiles at sea, air-based on the launch platform. This is the R-73 air-to-air missile. It's an excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands of them have been produced, and we have those thousands. It has a heat-seeking homing head. If you lock it on, the missile will acquire the target and chase it down. And if there are two missiles, Maguras can carry two missiles, then they can also destroy aerial targets. Here is confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed, and in fact, not just one. One was completely destroyed, and the second was seriously damaged. So in this sense, the GUR operators have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has entered a field that isn't typical for them, and they've performed quite well there. And then there's Malyuk's security service. That is the GUR under Budanov's command and the SPU under Malyuk's command. They now practically cover the entire spectrum of strike capabilities. They use them, and what's more, they produce them at their own facilities, which is very important. These are intelligence agencies operating from their own bases at their own expense. After all, their budgets are quite small. These aren't the armed forces of Ukraine, and they don't have Umarov's billions or hundreds of billions. Still, they've managed to find sponsors on their own, most likely, and have accomplished these kinds of tasks. Well, credit where it's due. They've done a great job. There's nothing more to say.
Tamar Nigovich, before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian military correspondents, I'd like you to give us a brief overview of the Ukrainian Hrom-2 missile system. What are its potential capabilities, and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
To understand the process, what is the Hrom 2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander. In terms of its operational range, the warhead it carries, and the advanced control system it utilizes, we have developed an Iskander missile system of our own. Several decades ago, a very promising and ambitious project was launched, which was called Sapsan. Based on the technological foundation and achievements of this Sapsan project, a modern solid fuel ballistic missile system was subsequently developed specifically for the Hrom series. This development marked a significant step forward in our missile capabilities. And naturally, this project produced results. That is, work was carried out on this project. Now we have Hrom 1 and Hrom 2 with a range of 300 kilometers. We built it and sold it with an audit. Together with Saudi money, by the way, we sold it, including the technical documentation. But most likely, thanks to the intervention of our partners, we managed to get at least the technical documentation back, maybe some launches, maybe even some missiles as well. So you could say that this Hrom 2 is basically the same as the Iskander, with a range of 500 kilometers. Moscow, the OSCE, these 500 kilometers. So if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka, remember we once talked about this, Rubliovka's elite exporters would be better off staying far away from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made. Why? Because the first Hrom should definitely bury Lenin, because how much longer does he have to lie there after all? The Kremlin is first and second is Rubliovka, or the other way around, depending on your preference. Maybe Rubliovka will be the first to go.
Roman Nikolaevich, now, of course, this information has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents, because in Russia they are claiming that the Ukrainian armed forces are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? Let's analyze it.
To understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border. If you don't count the bends of the straight border between Belarus and Oskol, that's between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, that's the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions up to Oskol. On the Russian side, that's the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. So our main task is to turn this borderline into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do. The architecture of the front needs to be changed. To open the northern front, it has already been opened after we started advancing in the Kursk direction. Calling it towards Moscow is something only complete idiots would do. The main objective there was to tie down the enemy, and several tens of thousands of Russian troops were pinned down. And of course, the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, people call it differently. It could also be called a support zone if it's a front line and a mined strip. We need to create such a security zone, a demilitarized zone, about 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory, but the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So that's what this buffer zone is. It's being created, in fact, not even 30 kilometers deep. You can go in 3, 5, or 7 kilometers, but mine Russian territory, not ours, but Russian territory. Lay down several 100,000 of these mines, and they'll be digging them out for 100 years if they even want to. And naturally, army artillery can add another 25 kilometers to the creation of this 30-kilometer buffer zone. We did this in the Kursk direction. We accomplished it. The only retreat, as we've already mentioned, was almost catastrophic because the decision to withdraw and redeploy to defensive positions was made too late. What we're doing now in the Belgorod region is essentially the same kind of operation, only not as deep, without an operational breakthrough. A tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up the best defensive positions. The thing is, there's a difference in elevation there. It's the so-called central Russian upland, with height differences of 50 to 70 meters. And between, just for understanding, between the hills, yes. So the rivers, or rather the small streams that are there, are at an elevation of about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230 meters. So these elevation differences are best occupied at the higher point. It doesn't matter where they are, on our side or the Russian side. If there is an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that task is carried out. Right now in the area of Demidovka, a task is being carried out in the Belgorod direction. Well, the first issue is, of course, the creation of such a buffer zone, and the second is to try to intercept Russian reserves that will now be freed up from the Kursk direction as we withdraw. Along the borderline, they will be redeployed to the Eastern Front so that they don't end up on the Pokrovsk direction, where they might have about 2 divisions. That's practically 30,000 Russian troops who could now be transferred from the Kursk direction to the Eastern Front, and they will be passing right by, or rather through the Belgorod region. And in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is now being created in the Belgorod region. A positive trend is expected in the near future. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters even if we knew them. It's not allowed to broadcast tactical information on air. But in reality, I think in a week we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians claim to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region. The Air Force has already refuted this fake news. And as Andriy Demchenko reports, the Russians are storming the Sumy region border on ATVs. New Su aircraft are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hrihorovich?
They got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was a really good video sequence showing the use of F-16S over Sumy. Naturally, the Russian psychological operations work differently. From a logical and operational standpoint, they actually responded correctly. Our own information and psychological operations teams should take note and follow their example as well. After all, FSB and KGB officers, they've been conducting these psychological special operations for 100 years. And this kind of psychological operation was exactly what they needed to carry out, because the appearance of the F-16 practically at the line of contact really put pressure on the Russians. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely to drop certain munitions below the radar horizon of Russian air defenses. Naturally, no one could reach it. And this put pressure on the Russians in that direction. Naturally, they needed to counter this information, so they came up with another information psychological operation, claiming they had shot down an F-16 in that direction. And believe me, no one shot anything down. I have friends, quite a few friends, who would have shared information if anything had happened. I can say with confidence, no one shot anything down. The guys are working along the entire line of contact on F-16S and Mirages, who have already gone out on combat missions, carrying out tasks in those directions where it's possible, based on the density of the enemy's air defenses and our own ability to cover these aircraft. God's due. First, fill in the blanks yourself so I don't have to swear too much. So this so-called God's race in Trump's eyes was organized by Putin. For what purpose? Well, in order to create a certain amount of pressure. This is the same IPSO, an information psychological special operation in which the top officials of the state are involved. This is a serious operation. For what purpose? In order to give the Russian population mainly, and of course Trump and regarding Ukraine, a chance to try to suppress, to paint some other picture of the real events happening on the Kursk land. We are holding the Kursk land. No one is encircled there. We are holding on. And the retreat, yes, there was a retreat, indeed, a belated flight. If a month and a half ago, as we said, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been an organized withdrawal to defensive lines. This was a flight, but still to defensive lines located on Russian territory. The difference is as it was. The Sudzha River in Kursk along the Kushina, which flows there, the Pereplyuika stream, but its elevation above sea level is 140 meters. Nearby to the south, the elevation is already about 220 meters. So here there is at least a 50 to 70 meter rise, and this is Kursk land. And on these heights, our forces have taken up positions on the sections that withdrew from the Sudzha direction, and at the moment no one intends to retreat any further. Naturally, Russia needs to show that our troops are surrounded there, that everything is lost. Boss, the client is leaving, the cast is being removed, it's all over, and so on. They're trying to cut us off, but it's still a long way from an actual encirclement. It's simply unrealistic because along the borderline there are these ridges. That's how it's laid out. And of course, with our troops on Kursk soil, I don't think we'll be leaving from there. It's a good defensive line. The Russians, who are now trying to cut off our direction, are stuck in the Basovka area. That's in Sumy region, Sumy territory, just a few kilometers from the border, no more than that. They're trying to somehow break through and cut off the supply to this group. And in the information space, to somehow ramp up the pressure, well, Putin has thrown out some God's due, so to speak, thrown it at Trump. And now Trump is mirroring it. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, and in Syria. Naturally, if the Russians decide to make their presence felt there, it won't end well for anyone, and most likely strikes against Iran are next. In the Middle East, which Trump got dragged into and now he has nowhere to go, well, Witkoff dragged him in, and after all, he's such a great Israeli American or American Israeli. That's why Russian oil refineries of all kinds and levels will continue to burn. Maybe not with the same intensity and frequency, but it will happen a bit differently. Not sanctions, for example, or actions by the Ukrainian defense forces, but the work of the local underground. At different levels, I think, by the way, this kind of work by informants, ours, could be about as effective as the Ukrainian defense forces are now. Believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians will definitely not stop fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity, and you won't be able to turn around several million people from Donetsk, Luhansk, or Crimea either.
Dear audience, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine in the comments. Share your thoughts about this situation as a whole. Renowned analyst Roman Svetan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.